when it comes to the reaction of the public, as far as I can see, people are shocked, are very angry. They also recognize that this is really something very unprecedented. I think they feel violated, even, that their will has been violated. So it's also very emotional at the same time, I think, that this party, even though, you may have criticized it for your entire life, now is taken away from you.
You're listening to This Authoritarian Life, a podcast in which we explore everyday human stories to make sense of authoritarian politics. My name is Kristóf Szombati.
And I'm Erdem Evren.
So, welcome back, listeners of This Authoritarian Life. When we started this latest season of our podcast, we thought with Erdem that we were mainly going to be talking about Hungary because there was clearly a turning point, which we could already see before the elections. And these conversations on Hungary will continue because there's a lot to talk about. And the process of post-illiberalism, so what comes after Orbán, is still just unfolding. But in the meantime, we've seen some interesting developments in Turkey, partly unexpected, partly expected, I would say. And we thought that we would turn the tables around and I would ask Erdem to lead us into them and contextualize them, because I think there's very little actually that's been reported in the international media on what happened in the last 2 weeks. And it's also very difficult to make sense of it. It's kind of opaque. So what happened? I'll just give you a very brief kind of intro, and then I'll ask Erdem to expound on that or to say more about it. I think it was on the 21st of May, a regional court in Turkey basically removed the leader of the main opposition party. This is 2 years before the next scheduled presidential elections. And this seems to be a turning point because this is an unprecedented move in Turkey, even though there is a lot of precedence for the state to mingle in party affairs. But to do such a radical move is kind of out of the ordinary. And it did trigger a very strong societal response. So actually, one of my students who is Turkish was on the streets about 100 meters from the party headquarters of the main opposition party, which is called the CHP, so it's the Social Democratic Party. And I'm going to ask Erdem right now immediately to jump into it and tell us a bit what happened now and what is the longer process that we need to take into account to understand this court decision, which kind of came out of the blue. So what happened?
Well, what happened? As you said, on the 21st of May, regional courts practically annulled the last two congresses of CHP. The second one is less important for us, but the one that took place in November 2023 has been nullified, as they say apparently in this legal language. So the state is basically telling the party that we're going to act as if that Congress has not even happened. Those people who've been elected, including the leader, are actually not the party leadership anymore. And what I do temporarily, and this is also important, that I will hand in the party to the previous leader, that is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and to his team, which also obviously renders the current leadership completely powerless. They no longer control the party apparatus. And 3 days later, and this was maybe the more unexpected part, that this happened so quickly, those MPs and those party members, those delegates close to Kılıçdaroğlu, the former leader, basically wanted to enter the party headquarters. And the current leadership and their supporters, who are the majority, barricaded themselves from inside the party headquarters and very, actually, I have to say, bravely defended their party against this scandalous intervention. But not long after, the police showed up and they literally cut the doors that's in the party headquarters and entered the party headquarters, pepper sprayed the people inside the party headquarters, went up to the 12th floor, that is the leadership floor apparently, handed in the decision to the party leader Özgür Özel and asked them to, to leave the party simply. And that's what he did. He gathered all his supporters and he marched from the party headquarters in Ankara to the parliament, signaling that, it's not over, but our new headquarters, so to speak, is the parliament itself. Now, this is unprecedented in many ways. This is the very first time, at least since 1950, that the ruling party attacks and paralyzes the main opposition party in such a way. It is unprecedented in the sense that there is such a powerful crack division within the main opposition party that actually becomes very useful for Erdoğan. And more importantly, it's very clear that given that Kılıçdaroğlu is now the appointed leader of the main opposition party, what we have is no longer than a control opposition. At least that's the one that is in charge of the party apparatus, at least. So in that sense, many people are worried that the multi-party system in Turkey may have actually come to an end. And not only that, but the very basic tenets of republicanism that should be sacrosanct for all political parties and all citizens are also very clearly being violated. So in that sense, yes, this is very much unprecedented, and this really takes us into another direction, I think, or at least we have reached another level, if you like, in the history of the authoritarianism under the AKP regime and Erdoğan.
So you already mentioned two things that I think are important to dig a bit deeper into. One is, I know we're not jurists, and it must be very complicated from a legal perspective, but still, you mentioned that it's the ruling party intervening into the affairs of an opposition party. Legally speaking, this was a regional court, right, that took this unprecedented decision. So is it clear to the public that is watching, or the people who are intervening in the public debate, that this is really the hegemonic dominant party's hands that is intervening through the court into the opposition's kind of internal political life?
Well, yes and no. As far as most jurists are concerned, this is absolutely illegal in the sense that a regional court has absolutely no say on the workings, how a political party basically elects its leader. This is very clearly up to the Higher Council of Elections, YSK. So in that sense, I think pretty much everyone agrees that, this is a very clearly a political decision taken by the ruling party, by Erdoğan, to paralyze and divide and conquer the main opposition party. But at the same time, because it is the CHP delegates from the party congress of 2023 that actually kickstarted this process, because it's them who took this to the court in the first place. Now the AKP members and Erdoğan and the pro-government media can say that we have nothing to do with this. This is an intra-JHP affair. The court decided in this way and that way, but we have absolutely nothing to do with what has happened. This is basically a simple fight between the Kılıçdaroğlu supporters and the Özgür Özel and İmamoğlu supporters. So in that sense, it may not be that clear, at least, definitely for most of the supporters of the AKP and MHP. Although, according to some polls, they also seem to be quite uncomfortable about this decision. Mm-hmm. And also, third, yes, annulment is also, I think, the term that they use for justifying this decision is called mutlak butlan. We hadn't heard of this term at all before. It's just like many other legal terms. It comes from Ottoman Turkish, and it's, I think, even means something more than annulment. It means nullification. An absolute nullification, I think, would probably be the best translation. To the extent that it says, I basically, the state with this decision, or the court with this decision, is saying that with this decision, I'll be acting as if the Congress of 2023 has never happened. It doesn't exist. It's null. And this is a very archaic legal mechanism that the AKP chose to resort to. And I think they also have a bit of problem explaining like what it means, like why such a drastic decision, and why now, and so on and so forth. So I think this is one of the struggles at the moment, kind of explaining to the public and mainly to the non-JHP electorate that, this is such a crazy, illegal decision.
So let's come to interpretation. Why do you think this was necessary, this pretty drastic and unprecedented intrusion into the life of the main opposition party? Is it because the opposition has fared better? That's something as an external observer I saw, and that many of us saw, that when the party changed hands in 23, as far as I remember, under the new leader, Özer, they did much better. They won the mayoral elections, the local elections, a few months after the new leadership came in. So is that one of the possible readings, that there's fear on behalf of Erdogan that he would lose the next election?
Absolutely. So let me take back to 2023, to the last presidential elections. So in that elections, actually quite unexpectedly, the opposition's candidate, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who now happens to be the appointed leader of CHP, lost the presidential elections to Erdoğan relatively closely. So it was like 52% to 48%. After which, obviously, the opposition within the party, that is İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, or the former mayor of Istanbul, and his ally, Özgür Özel, who was like a heavyweight with the CHP already, decided to change things in the party. And they took it to this notorious Congress. But already this raised the votes of the party. And we very quickly saw that in March 2024 in the local elections, where the cumulative party vote actually was around 30% for the very first time since 40 years, 45 years. And more than AKP, Erdoğan's party, by the way. And not only that, but the party won all the major cities, Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir. But more unexpectedly, for the very first time in 40, 50 years, CHP also got municipalities in Anatolia, even in like very, very conservative places. That still shocks me. And not only that, but they also won the majority of municipalities also in big cities, and also those municipalities that are deemed very conservative or very nationalist or very pro-government. So I think this already signaled to Erdoğan that things are not going all right, even though he had just won the presidential elections, actually, which was his biggest dream. Also, at the same time, the economy has been doing pretty badly for a very long time by now. I mean, the devaluation of the lira has been a constant in our lives for a very long time. After the presidential elections, Erdoğan brought let's say a pro-IMF, World Bank kind of economist who has been pushing for an austerity package since then. And people are very unhappy about it, obviously. I mean, they managed to control the dollar and euro, but the inflation is still very high. The food inflation is unbelievably high. And, the best that they can do is to increase the pensions and the minimum wage once in every, let's say, 6 months, 5 months, which is not enough at all, but which also, once again, contributes to the inflation in one way or another. So things were not going well. But still, most people were speculating that, what is the big deal? Erdoğan has done it before. Just 6 months before he calls the elections, he will basically open the state coffers and he will, lower the interest rates and pump money into the economy. He will, as he has always done in the past 25 years, will buy the votes of the electorate, at least enough numbers,
Yeah, to win.
to win. He doesn't need that much. Like he already has, I don't know, together with the MHP, the ruling bloc is about 30 to 35%.
Yeah, it's the nationalists and the conservatives
exactly,
together.
That's the nationalist, ultra-nationalist party, which is an ally of Erdoğan's AKP. But then the Iran war came. And the Iran war apparently kind of pushed Erdoğan to expedite things, to make quicker decisions. Because even though, Erdoğan can speak to both Iran and to Trump, and even though his energy exports partly come through other sources, still this is going to affect Turkish economy terribly. And will precisely, I think, feel the worst effects within 6 months or a year or something like that. That is shortly before when we thought Erdoğan was going to call for elections. So if you cannot buy the votes of the electorate, then the other best option, I think, is to just conquer and paralyze the main opposition party.
This recalls, what we talked about in relation to Hungary.
Yeah.
The factors were very, very similar. A tanking economy, maybe not tanking to the extent that the Turkish one, but still clearly, no growth in the last 3-4 years. And the appearance of, for the first time on the opposition side, of someone who actually has charisma, the ability to mobilize even former supporters of the ruling party, all of that. So I'm actually wondering, do you think Erdoğan was watching the Hungarian election?
Well, when we talked about this, I said, well, I don't know, there are probably more differences between Hungary and Turkey than similarities, but come to think about it, this is not obviously the very first maneuver of Erdoğan. Before all this, he basically got İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, the very charismatic, basically leader of opposition, arrested based on some corruption charges, right? And, I remember already before, the Orbán lost the elections, already some years ago, the Budapest mayor was kind of the hope of the Hungarian opposition, right, in the previous round of elections. And I remember it very well that at the time that people were actually, drawing comparisons between İmamoğlu and that person, I can't remember his name.
Karácsony, but it doesn't matter.
Okay.
He's still mayor, as opposed to İmamoğlu, who's now sitting in jail.
So, unlike Orbán, I think Erdoğan could afford to actually very openly kind of get arrested and eliminate them as a very serious kind of oppositional figure. And now, even that's not enough, apparently. And now it's the entire, oppositional infrastructure and institution that he wants to get rid of. And he could manage that, as we said, by manipulating, by building on this division between Kılıçdaroğlu and İmamoğlu and Özel.
Let's talk about that, because it's clear from what you're explaining that, there is a massive intervention on behalf of the state into the internal life of an oppositional party, which points beyond the whole Republican settlement, as you said. But still, it seems that these differences actually do exist and have existed within the party. So who are these two people? Actually, these are more two camps than two people. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, first of all, you have on the one hand those who are fed up with Kılıçdaroğlu because...
Tell us a bit about him.
Kılıçdaroğlu?
Yeah.
Kılıçdaroğlu is an interesting figure. Kılıçdaroğlu actually comes from the city of Dersim, which is almost entirely Kurdish and Alevi. So Alevism is kind of a form of Shiism in Turkey, although there are some differences, but let's say it's the minority, basically, Islamic sect in Turkey. So he actually comes from the very margins, if you come to think about it. He, by the way, he's openly Alevi, but he doesn't accept that he's Kurdish, or he identifies as a Turkoman or something like that. But then, even though he came from such a marginal position and from a relatively poor family, he went to good state schools, and he actually became a state bureaucrat. So he actually first, I think, made his name by becoming the director of the Turkish NHS. At the time when it was completely bankrupt and everything, but still. And then, not unlike many other high-level state bureaucrats, he made it to the CHP. He first became an MP. And then, after the then leader of CHP was ousted with a sex tape scandal, he kind of became the new leader of the party. And already he had established this image as being an clean hands kind of candidate, someone like very clean, not corrupt at all, who was already kind of bringing these, files about corrupt AKP politicians to the parliament, and this is how he made his name, I would say. But at the same time, he's very ambitious, to the extent that I think he really suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. So we should also say that, by the way, he wanted the power back at the age of 78. So he's not in his 50s, he's not in his 60s, but after losing 10 elections to Erdoğan or to AKP, after losing the presidential elections in 2023, which was the biggest shock probably for everyone, he still thinks that he's actually the right person to beat Erdoğan. And I don't know if he would say democratize Turkey by now, but at least to come to power and become the next president, I guess. But this is the interesting part. And after 2023 elections, Özel and İmamoğlu made it very clear that, okay, this doesn't work with you. So we need fresh blood and we can do this. And they formed like a clique within the party that has the support of the broader public, I would say. Because obviously, as you can imagine, Kılıçdaroğlu was so unpopular after the elections because it was such a disappointment. At the same time, so you have this, you have those who want fresh blood, those who are with the old guards. At the same time, actually Kılıçdaroğlu is probably more left-wing than İmamoğlu and Özgür Özel camp. İmamoğlu himself comes from a very center-right kind of background, actually.
Also a religious family.
Also partly religious family, also actually quite a nationalist family originally. So he's your typical neoliberal politician, typical pragmatic politician. He can adopt social democratic policies one day, he can resort to very, very, very neoliberal interventions the other day. This is precisely what he did, by the way, as he was running Istanbul. But unfortunately for me, this is his strength, because this is also precisely how Erdoğan operates. Because apparently, to be successful in Turkish politics, you need to be a chameleon. And Erdoğan has been the chameleon of Turkish politics for the past 25 years. And now it's İmamoğlu.
Is there even a policy debate in Turkey? I need to ask this because in Hungary, for outside observers, one of the hardest things to understand was that people are, the election campaign wasn't really about policies. I'm not saying that they were fully absent. Mm-hmm. The current new prime minister did promise certain things, but still people were mostly looking at, how he functions as a leader. This whole question of charisma, or the lack of charisma. They were looking at, he's more energetic than Orban. So, these were the kind of, it's the era of as in Hungary, it's called influencer politics now. And, back to Turkey, is it similar?
I think it's similar. I think when you look at it purely ideologically, if you like, you would see shades of populism, neoliberalism, social democracy, all these things in both parties, in all parties even probably, potentially. But what it boils down to in the end of the day is that, is it going to be the AKP bureaucrats and the contractors and the big business and the Mittelstand, maybe the middle level of capitalist class that is close to the Erdoğan family and the AKP that's going to kind of benefit from this, or another clique. And at least the CHP side has been promising to do this slightly bit more democratically, slightly bit more transparent way, in a more quote-unquote rational way. At least, we're not going to resort to heterodox economic policies to kind of continue with the system. And as a matter of fact, this is also the weakness of CHP's promises, because what the public knows so well is that the moment the populist part of AKP's economic policies stop, then this brings more poverty. I mean, it is already like people are living in poverty, etc. But, cyclically, once in every 3 years, once in every 4 years, if you know a person from the party, a high-ranking member, you can already find a job or something like that. So they survive, barely, but they can at least survive. But what they're afraid of is that if the so-called more rational, more internationally recognized economic policy rules the day, then this is basically IMF politics. This is hardcore austerity politics.
Yeah, and in this sense, it really matters because, the Hungarian opposition was able to channel these much more positive, hopeful energies saying, we have been cut off from EU funds, but now we'll bring these back. And it's a lot of money. It's 16 billion euros that can be spent in the next few years. So that really allowed them to navigate out of this space of the devil versus Beelzebub kind of situation.
You are absolutely right. The best that the CHP or the opposition can do is to say that, well, we are going to confiscate the property of this very rich AKP elite or something like that at best, or we are going to bring the money that they kind of buried in Switzerland or something like that, which makes sense, which makes so much sense, but it's probably not that realistic for your ordinary voter who is undecided between Erdoğan and Özgür Özel or something like that.
All right.
But since we are talking about it, we have a listener question. Nadine kind of said, actually...
Who is Erdem's partner?
Nadine is my partner. Said, well, if this happened in Hungary, it could sure happen in Turkey as well, right? So, it will take just another mobilization to get rid of Erdoğan and etc. And I was like, well, I'm not sure, actually. And then I thought about it a bit. And yes, I think the fact that Hungary is an EU member makes a big difference. Precisely for these reasons, that the opposition can at least promise to bring 10 billion euros if they come to power, something that Orban was not capable of doing in the end of his rule.
Yeah.
But also, I think Hungary is important for the EU for other reasons. Now, Turkey's role within this big power play is just to, you know, be a barrier between what is happening in the Middle East and Europe on the one hand, and on the other hand, a place where all these refugees and migrants who are trying to make it to Europe are trapped and detained under horrible conditions. So this Faustian pact between the EU and Turkey that has happened in early 2020s, officially at least, really doesn't leave much room for a huge change for Turkey, I would say, in that sense.
I mean, remember when we talked about Serbia, we had this episode. We came away with the exact same feeling when we were talking with the two activists or journalist activists, and right, they were telling us that it's the semi-periphery. Basically, the question is who is going to exploit us, and with the lithium mines and all that. And the EU is playing a very similar game to China.
Absolutely.
And, Merkel's interest in stabilocracy was mentioned, I think. So, yes, I think this is a very, very, very big difference between these two spaces. I'm glad you raised that.
And Trump, by the way, the US is very happy with Erdoğan.
Yeah.
Very, very happy with Erdoğan. So,
but let's come back to. I want us to move a bit towards looking at the societal response and what may come, because we haven't talked about that. But just to wrap up this part of what happened and why, basically, Erdogan is trying to create some kind of controlled opposition using the existing internal, mostly personalistic struggles within the main opposition party, right? And basically expanding and making that division so prominent that it will lead to the implosion of the party, as far as I understand.
Yes, and not only that, but probably the party, CHP, under the leadership of Kılıçdaroğlu, will, find the common ground with AKP when it comes to certain issues. First of all, probably by lifting the immunity of MPs close to Özel, and even Özel himself. That's what's been discussed, at least at the moment. Probably, I hope not, but he will also end up in the same prison cell that İmamoğlu is now.
Oh, really?
That's very, I think, yeah. I mean, already they brought some files to the parliament, and really the next step is to have a vote over whether to lift his immunity or not. So yeah, I mean, what is clear is that Kılıçdaroğlu can stay in that position only thanks to Erdoğan and the AKP judiciary.
Right.
So if he doesn't toe the line, he would lose his leadership overnight. So in that sense, it is very clearly a controlled opposition.
And this is why it's a turning point and taken as such.
This is precisely why it's a turning point. Now, what is there? I mean, the reactions I'll talk about in a moment, but maybe we should also quickly add what the Özel
Yeah.
And now, by the way, we are referring to them as the elected leader, that is Özel, and the appointed leader as Kılıçdaroğlu. So the elected leader, as I just said, kind of now turns the entire parliament into his headquarters. There has been so many calls from the public to establish a new political party. And actually, they already keep one on the side to be sure, because if you migrate into a new political party, you need to have congresses. It's like a long process, so it would take some time to be even eligible for entering the next elections or standing in the next presidential elections or something like that. So they already started the process. But at the same time, they are very reluctant to leave CHP. And actually, I understand it because there are very good reasons for that. I mean, CHP is the founding party of the Turkish Republic. It was Atatürk's party. It has, such a well-recognized name, right? I mean, I know people who have been voting for CHP for 4 generations or something. At the same time, if they leave CHP, they would also lose all the financial support, all the money that the parties receive from the treasury, basically. And as the new party, they wouldn't be eligible for that. And also, this is like a huge, massive operation, like having thousands, 10,000s of representatives, members, delegates, etc., all across Turkey. So game plan is this, and this Özgür Özel made very clear again and again. Our first task is to have another Congress, push Kılıçdaroğlu to have one, and Kılıçdaroğlu is refusing to do that, and he will refuse to do that. But there is a time limit, probably. That is, they say 7 to 8 months. And in the meantime, I think probably they will lose their membership in CHP, and that will kickstart the process of establishing a new political party with all the promises and dangers that it carries, actually. But when it comes to the reaction of the public, as far as I can see, people are shocked, are very angry. I mean, they also recognize that this is really something very unprecedented. I think they feel violated, even, that their kind of will has been violated. That this is really happening for the very first time in 70, 80 years since the beginning of the multi-party system is in itself, I think, something very sad for many people. And by the way, this is not only for CHP members, but I saw that this is also how, let's say, your hardcore Marxist also feels. Because, you may not be a CHP supporter. I mean, I've never voted for CHP in my entire life. But your parents are. Because, probably it's more common for you to become a socialist if you have social democratic parents, if you have parents who have been voting for CHP or its other variants or something like that. I know people whose parents met in CHP, a party building or something like that. So it's also very emotional at the same time, I think, that this party, even though, you may have criticized it for your entire life, now is taken away from you.
I mean, it's also what the heritage of that party,
yes.
Right? Like Atatürk's
also
whole heritage is also at play.
Also this Atatürk's party kind of rhetoric is also very, very strong. And actually, while they were barricading inside the party headquarters on the 21st of May, I mean, I was following it live. Yes, there were like so many Atatürk posters and everything.
So, what kind of? I mean, looking forward, what kind of fears does this also bring, or are there any hopes that are dashed here? I mean, you just explained that it's not like the opposition was the carrier of a lot of hopes anyway, but still, I may imagine, were there still hopes of normalcy? That in Eastern Europe, these are what hopes tend to be like, the hope for a normal life. Is it what is at stake now with the possible disappearance of this party, or what is at stake?
Not at all, I think. Not at all. I mean, no one, even the most hardcore AKP supporter, I would say, is not expecting any kind of normalcy to arrive in the next months or years. Quite the contrary, this is really the harbinger of a much more chaotic. I mean, Turkey has already been so chaotic and so difficult and whatever, but like much more chaotic kind of political and social scene in the near future, definitely, at least until the next presidential elections. But at the same time, maybe if there is one hope, it is that, this basically brings the opposition much closer to each other. And there are certain signs in that direction. Let's say some other right-wing parties which are in the parliament kind of made it very clear that, this is not acceptable at all, that we are on the side of CHP and on Özgür Özel. We are not going to...
These are the people who left the AKP?
AKP and also MHP. So, for example, E Party is a split from the ultra-nationalist MHP, and they still kind of cater to that kind of secular nationalist vote. I don't know, they probably have something between 6 to 8%, according to polls. What it means is something else. But let's say if or when the opposition comes up with a presidential candidate for the 2028 elections, which will definitely happen before 2028 though, it may be easier for both those party leaders and their supporters to support the candidate of CHP, or of the real CHP, the elected CHP, if you like. But at the same time, I'm, I think, pessimistic in the sense that, if you noticed, we've been only talking about party politics.
Yes.
And we've only been talking about politics in terms of parties and leaders
Exactly.
and party infrastructures and etc. And I think, but this decision kind of tells me is that that is gone. There is absolutely no hope for oppositional politics insofar as you're going to do politics with those terms, basically, and with those resources. And in that sense, I'm critical of Özel because, once again, his political imaginary, very understandably, as someone who spent his entire life within CHP, is very much limited to party politics and anything that is related to that. That it doesn't occur to him to, I don't know, at least have a conversation about, like, I don't know, there are workers in this country and, there's a huge kind of strata of precaria in this country, and actually many of these people that may be supporting you, and maybe you do something about it. Maybe you actually try to bring politics and economy together to actually then decide on a strategy, rather than just staying within CHP, like hopelessly. Or if it's really about republicanism, or if it's really about the will of the people, if you like, why doesn't it occur to him to maybe kind of call for some assemblies? Kind of really, if the government, if the ruling power is really targeting this, leadership, maybe it makes sense to disseminate this power as much as possible all across Turkey, maybe at the neighborhood level.
Yeah, and I mean, and the Kurds have, because they've been pushed so often into a corner, there is actually some experience of how to do that. What happened? How you actually build people power against an oppressive state apparatus. So, is there any connection between? I mean, there's this whole peace process that's at the same time ongoing.
Oh yeah.
So how is this Kurdish element come into the picture?
Well, the peace process is also something that most of us fail to understand fully. What happened was that a couple of years ago, the leader of this ultra-nationalist party, Devlet Bahçeli, single-handedly asked the PKK leaders to come to the parliament so that there can finally be a negotiation and a solution to the Kurdish question. And there are still many things that even the most seasoned commentators and observers disagree on. Like, why did this happen? Why now? Is it like some kind of joint efforts by the AKP and MHP, by Erdoğan and Devlet Bahçeli? Or actually it is Bahçeli himself who is taking the initiative and Erdoğan is kind of supporting it, or at least kind of keeping quiet, but actually not unhappy about this at all? Or is this some kind of a good cop, bad cop kind of situation where you see Bahçeli as the most enthusiastic supporter of this process and Erdoğan as kind of a silent and semi-critical kind of partner in all this? We don't know. We don't know either if this started for reasons related to domestic politics or foreign politics. Did it have to do something about the regime change in Syria, for example? I mean, one of the official explanations is that, the state was so afraid that the Kurds could be, used as some cannon by this or that regional force, that the Turkish state decided to actually sit around the table and finally, start the negotiations with the Kurds. Long story short, one explanation is that you cannot have both Kurds and the CHP as your enemies. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it historically, this has always been the case, actually. So if you are making peace with the Kurds, then CHP will be your enemy. If you are having some kind of, close relation with the CHP, then that's bad news for Kurds. So some people think that, this was already planned quite early on, that Erdoğan already made his mind. But to keep the Kurds on his side, he had to say yes to the so-called peace process, which is, by the way, not exactly going anywhere at the moment, but all the actors are still on the table, at least.
Are the Kurds silent on this CHP issue?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, they also made it very clear that, this is very unacceptable. They visited Özel. By the way, Özel is very close to Kurds, like in particular, and so is İmamoğlu. And they made it very clear in the past years. So I think they have some quite close relations with the Kurds. But at the same time, it doesn't matter what you personally think, right? You obviously cannot basically get out of the table just because the government is completely crushing CHP and turning it into a controlled opposition, as we said. So this they wouldn't do either. But how the Kurdish basis is reacting to this, I think, is another question. Because already I think they are unhappy about the way in which this peace process has been cooked and it's been going on. So I suspect CHP, or let's say the elected CHP leaders, may have gained even more supporters among the Kurds, I would say, possibly.
I mean, let's look at the level of street politics, because there was a big protest on the day when the police broke into the headquarters and handed over the court's verdict to the elected leadership. And now it's been Bayram, so the Eid.
There has been a break.
It's a big Muslim holiday, which means that there's no politics right now. Everyone is with their families.
It's over now, though. Mm-hmm.
So do you think are protests likely to continue? Is there going to be a popular dimension to this resistance or whatever it is? Or, yeah.
I think there is much appetite for that, for street politics, actually. People really are very angry and they really want to be on the streets. They really want to show their support to Özgür Özel. And we've also seen this before after İmamoğlu has been arrested, actually.
On corruption charges.
But the problem is that, once again, and by the way, on the day that they attacked the CHP and entered the CHP headquarters, there have been protests pretty much everywhere, especially in big cities, like 3 different protests in Istanbul, for example. But the problem is that, once again, it is a party leader and party politics that is at the center of this kind of street politics. It is the party leader that sets the date and the time for coming together. It is a party leader that primarily speaks to the crowds and tells them about, this and that and what we are going to do next. And more importantly, we've seen this in the last round of protests that actually, the regime kind of allows that to a certain extent. The regime knows or has seen at some point that, okay, do that, because it knows you cannot keep a protest as long as it stays as a protest, as a gathering, more than 2-3 weeks, basically. It inevitably fizzles out. Either something new happens, a new tragedy happens in Turkey, or, another court decision is taken, or but something like that. So there is very paradoxically something very depoliticizing about the way in which the elected JHP leadership channels this anger on the streets, actually. I don't know what exactly one could do. I mean, it's not, we have a palace, but at least it should start a conversation about this. At least it should, once again, democratize the decision-making process to a certain degree. But as far as I can see, really, once again, its political imaginary is limited to just, meeting in front of this or that building for 2 hours, and four male politicians telling them what to do or what the situation is or what they feel for hours non-stop. And people just wave their flags, either Turkish flags or JHP flags or the flags of their socialist party. It doesn't matter. And that's it. Sometimes, the police intervene. Sometimes they arrest people. Sometimes they, tear gas people. All this happens. There is still appetite for kind of escalating it, I think. But there's no leadership that is capable, as far as I can see, of organizing and mobilizing this anger properly beyond party politics and its very limited political imaginary.
Yeah, it seems like to start, gathering those popular energies, if you will, against this hegemonic ruling party, you would need to go and dig into the grievances.
Absolutely.
Like, that's the only way, I think. And you would need to, some actors on the grassroots level would need to build that kind of grievance politics and then somehow come together with maybe the later presidential campaign. But without, that's my sense from afar, that kind of grassroots energy being structured along the lines of grievances and coming together into some kind of, not a program, but a set of demands that are, that open up, as you said, the political imagination in a realistic way. It's very, very difficult to see that. But, we also didn't see it in Hungary. Like, when I left in 2022, the reason I left, one of the main reasons is it looked hopeless. Mm-hmm. There were no popular energies at all. What I was seeing around myself is, and this is what the system was built on, was I called it the dancing with the state, or dancing with those who have the resources and are redistributing them. It's this kind of either clientelism, but it doesn't have to be like this patron-client thing, but it's a set of negotiations in which you get something and you give something, and it's at the workplace, it's in the state apparatus, in the bureaucracy. That's the kind of relation that citizens had with the people in power and also with each other. So that's why I thought, if this is the dance that's going on, I'm out of it. Like, I don't want to dance with that. But that has to do with my personal biography. The point is, fast forward 2 years after we left, and suddenly there is this outburst of popular energy. It was this scandal of a person who was hiding a pedophile in a foster home. Mm-hmm. And that the moral energies coming out of that are what the new prime minister at that time, who was coming out of the ruling party could ride. But at the same time, there was a lot of grassroots energy fermenting around what's wrong with our lives, and how things can be better. And it was mostly formulated around, this set of, demands for a more normal life, which basically meant better public services, less corruption, more accountable politicians, and an end to the hate campaigns. Mm-hmm. These were the demands, basically. And for some people, back to Europe instead of more close alignment with Russia. And those things could then come together, this grassroots energy with the new leader and his mobilizational capacities. Now I know we've talked about, how Turkey is fundamentally different from Hungary, so I'm very much aware that you cannot take that and set it in Turkey, but I'm just wondering, is there a precedent for the street kind of, or grassroots organizations being the carriers of these oppositional demands and having success in that?
Well, Gezi was, I
Gezi,
think, the moment of that. Precisely, it was completely bottom up. It was unbelievably democratic. It precisely democratized the decision-making, taking processes. It had a set of demands, let's say, unlike other similar kind of protests in the world. Did it work? Was it successful? Those comrades are in prison at the moment. So, but at the same time, Erdoğan couldn't exactly destroy the park and build this, hideous building either in the middle of Taksim Square, at least so far. And that, I think, changed Turkish politics, oppositional politics to a certain degree as well, like the Gezi spirit. If anything has left from it, I think there is some kind of, or let's put it this way, that can resurface any moment, I think. So in that sense, I'm not a pessimist. And I see kind of, parts of it, versions of it from time to time. In the midst of all this like dark authoritarianism and everything, Kristóf, just a few weeks ago, miners from a smaller city who weren't paid their salaries for months were organized by this radical union, left union, independent union. They came in front of the parliament. They protested for days. They were pepper sprayed, attacked, everything. But they forced the government to accept the workers' demands and forced the company to pay their salaries. They haven't done that yet, but at least the government found itself suddenly in this like very defensive position. Once hundreds of workers and their families were in the middle of Ankara basically shouting. So I would say it's those moments that we should take inspiration from. And it also, I think, it is those grievances that probably has the potentially to electrify a much bigger crowd than just people like me and whatever. People who have JHP family histories or people, who consider themselves in the left naturally or whatever. Because this is another group of people, they're also so much fed up. They also see the corruptness of all this. And more importantly, because the party machine and the patron-client relations are not working as well as they used to be, because there is simply not enough money in the coffers, and because also the power has been so much concentrated in the hands of Erdoğan that, let's say, the local party infrastructures, the party branches that I also studied in my own ethnography in Turkey, they are not working anymore. To really resolve some issues, you need someone not even from the party, but maybe from the palace or something. So
so those basic mechanisms are no longer
not working anymore. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So what that means is that even even their bases, even their core supporters, I think they are partly very unhappy. Or at least they see that, this is not working anymore. And more importantly, when that doesn't work, but you see that some, AKP businessman or someone very close to a high-ranking person from the party is still doing well, then that becomes a big issue then.
Yeah, that was exactly what exploded Hungarian politics.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about this as well.
I think this was the main factor.
I think this has been going on for some time, and this anger, I think, has been accumulating. But who knows? Who expected Gezi, something like that, or who expected this very quick kind of regime change in Hungary as well. So at one level, I'm very optimistic in the sense that anything can happen, really. There is enough anger, there is enough appetite, there is, all that is there, I think. But yes, the political imaginary and doing things differently, the will for that, I think that we need to talk about in the next weeks and months and years to come.
Yeah, I mean, parliamentary politics can become a trap. And I guess Erdoğan is trying to maybe set up that kind of trap. But we'll see. So I guess, our promise to our listeners can be that we will also follow this story.
Yes, as Kristóf did, I'm also planning to speak to someone when I go to Istanbul very soon. And have maybe a better view of things and a more kind of deep analysis than I can offer from here in Berlin, actually.
No, I thought it was very helpful. Let's hope our listeners liked it too. So stay tuned. We'll be following this up.
So that's it from us for today. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
We would also like to thank our contributors, music and mastering Shai Levy, artwork and graphics Polina Georgescu, editing Vera Jonas, and our in-house communications advisor Anna Szilágyi.